Theodore. He's a tugboat and a friendly tugboat too. A friendly tugboat too. Oh, Theodore likes to do the things that friendly tugboats do. Pushing and a pulling in the great big harbor, in the great big world is so much fun. So many brand new things to discover. Waking with the sun, gotta get the job done. Oh, Theodore and Emily, Fodak, Hank and George, and the harbor master too.
Theodore was moving Barrington barge. He loved pulling the flat-bottomed friendly barges to and from each shore. But more importantly, pulling barges helped Theodore prepare for getting his V word. So when Theodore became a V, he would be allowed to leave the harbor and go off across the ocean, pulling ships all around the world. Theodore was certainly getting to be a very good barge puller. Well, on that day they were passing the sandy beach. Theodore thought there was something strange about that beach, but he wasn't sure just what it was.
Maybe it's because, oh, I don't know, a ton of garbage just lying all over the beach? Your answer is practically staring at you, Theo. But anyway, Theodore heads back to the dock that evening where he meets up with Emily. Theodore notices that his friend is sad due to the children not coming to play on the beach anymore. As the two tugs try to solve this puzzling mystery, who shows up but good old Hank?
Whoa! Shouted Hank. Before he could say anything, Hank began moving all over the place. Whoa! He's out of control, cried Emily. Hank, turn off your engine. Hank managed to turn his engine off, and he finally stopped. Emily went over to have a look. She said. Sure enough, Hank's propeller was all tangled up in a piece of rope, some gunky newspapers, some seaweed, all kinds of garbage. Now, where do you think all that came from? Asked Hank.
How about the imaginary humans we hardly ever see in this show? Seems logical, don't it? Anyway, it turns out that pollution is the culprit in this situation. Fodak then explains to the tugs that pollution is anything that makes a big noise, smell, and mess. And as they all continue to discuss this, the Jersey boy shows up.
He roared up very fast and very close to the tugs and buzzed the dock the way he sometimes did to announce his arrival. Well, it frightened that poor dock, whose name was Donald. The tugs all coughed in the cloud of smelly smoke that snorted from George's stack. What a big noise, said Fodak. And smell, said Hank. And mess, added Theodore. That's what pollution is, said Emily. So it's George who's making pollution.
George? What the heck was that all about? Did you really need to come in that fast and blow all that smoke?
You know old George always has to make a big entrance. And, by the way, nice of you guys to just put all of the blame on George. Some friends you are. Anyway, as Theodore cruises along the next day, he notices the beach is covered in a lot of garbage. Took you long enough to figure that out. But his thoughts are interrupted when Fodak floats by, making all kinds of noise with his equipment.
Suddenly, Theodore heard a very loud noise. It was coming from Fodak's radio. Fodak, called Theodore, you're making a big noise. Now that's pollution. Well, replied Fodak, you're leaking oil in the water. Theodore looked around behind him, and sure enough, there was a long trail of oil leaking from his engine. See, you're making pollution, said Fodak. Right about then, our friend Hank bobbed past, and Fodak noticed he was missing his two front bumpers. What happened to your bumpers, Hank? He asked. They fell off. They were kind of crumbly, just garbage, really, so I tossed them in the cove. Theodore and Fodak both stared at Hank. Now, it was Hank who was the biggest pollution maker of them all.
Hank, I love you, but what the is wrong with you? You're just adding more to the problem. You can cut Theodore some slack because he didn't know he was leaking oil, but that wasn't very bright of you. Anyway, that evening the tugs are arguing about who's to take blame for the pollution when George arrives and buzzes the dock. Again.
And then he buzzed poor Donald the dock again. You don't need to buzz the dock and kick up all that smoke, said Emily. You're just showing off. What do you mean, me? Replied George. You always leave your engine on even when you're not working. Well, that makes smoke, too. Well, all the tugs began to toot and talk at once, and the loudest of them all were George and Emily. You tugs are disturbing the whole harbor, especially George and Emily, and you two should know better. Then the dispatcher told George and Emily that if they couldn't get along, he would have to cancel their next trips on the ocean. There are other tugs, he said, who could go out on the ocean, like Theodore. He's been doing a lot of good barge pulling lately. Now, please, be quiet and go to sleep.
Jeez, that's a little too harsh of a punishment just for a simple argument. And not for nothing, but Fodak should know better too. He's not a V-Tug for nothing, you know. And how can the dispatcher really think that Theodore is ready if all he's done is just pull barges? I thought you had to do more, like knowing how to pull ships and stuff. Even I don't think he's fully ready. But with that in mind, Theodore begins to think if he should pursue his dream, or does he give it all up and help his friends? All of this carries on into the next day.
The other tugs had long, long faces just like him. That's because they were still quarreling about who was making all the pollution. Uh-oh, said Hank. It was George. Hank knew they were all about to get buzzed again. Donald Dock was especially worried. But George was worrying so much about not being a V anymore, he forgot to buzz Donald. Theodore didn't even notice. He was trying to make a very big decision. You see, he could make everyone friends again, but then he would miss his chance to take George and Emily's place as a V-Tug. And he kept thinking to himself, what good would it be going away to the ocean if I didn't have my friends to come home to?
I don't think that would be fun at all. It's always nice to come home to your friends, and to lose all that just to be a V-Tug would be kind of selfish in a way. So with that said, Theodore turns to the others and begins to talk more about the pollution.
George buzzes the dock, and that makes smoke. Emily leaves her engine on when she's not working, and that makes smoke too. Fodak plays his radio too loud. Hank throws his bumpers in the water, and I leak oil. So, said George. Well, that means we're all making pollution, said Theodore. Not just you. Fodak thought about the harbor. I think pollution comes from lots of places, he said. There's smoke from the factory and oil from the refinery and garbage from the city. And there was lots of garbage on the sandy beach, too. It's everywhere, said Hank. Well, when they heard that, the tugs were even more upset. With so much pollution, what could any of them do about it? Maybe we could all stop making pollution, said Fodak. And all start cleaning up the harbor, added Theodore. We could even have a harbor cleanup contest. I have a better idea, said Hank. We could have a great harbor cleanup contest. If we have a contest, said Emily, it means that George is already ahead. He's already stopped buzzing the dock and making all that smoke. Well, now George was smiling. You know, he said, I think this contest is a pretty good idea. The tugs all talked at once, discussing things they could do to make the harbor cleaner in the Great Harbor Cleanup Contest. It was then and there that Theodore knew he'd made the right decision. For once more, the tugs were all friends again. And once again, the great ocean tug and salvage dock was his favorite place in the whole harbor. His place to be with his very best friends.
And that concludes George Buzzes the Dock. Alright, David, what are your thoughts?
This episode is one of those that honestly I could skip over. I can't find words to describe, like, how boring and how underwhelming it is. This is just in my opinion, but I did not like George's characterization in this episode. In fact, I would go so far as to say this is probably my least favorite episode that George was ever in.
I just think this episode is okay. My gripe with this is that while the title is called George Buzzes the Dog, the episode itself is not fully centered around George's buzzing. Mainly all the tugs and their problem with the pollution. In a matter of speaking, what this episode should have been called was Theodore and the Pollution. But anyway, this episode is actually the beginning of our first and only two-parter episode of the series. Storyline-wise, I don't think it's terrible, as it sends a good message to kids about what can happen when you're not careful where your garbage ends up. And I have to give a big applause to Theodore. I understand it was difficult for him to make this tough decision, since, well, he's been chasing his dream for a while now, but he gave it all up to help his friends. That really shows what a true blue friend he really is. But like I said, this first part is, well, okay to start off, I guess. And who knows, maybe part 2 will pick up a little. With that said, up next is the Great Harbor Cleanup Contest.